Salutations, ladies and gentlemen. The Knife Raven here, back again after a month. Yes, I know, where have I been? Short answer, I've been ill. Long answer, I've been ill and have also had very little time to spare. But it's been a while, and I'd like to think I am almost fully recovered. But at the same time, I have a moment, so why not go ahead and make a video? First of all, to confirm that I'm still alive, and also to fulfill on my promise of re-reviewing a bunch of old knives from my previous channel. Now, some of the reviews on many of my knives got taken down, but others are still up. This is one of them that you can still watch, actually. So think of this as a sequel review. Now, when I first discussed this knife, again, I was, well, less than competent, but now I have had not quite 2 years with this knife, and it's one that I have consistently been using. Now, it's very easy, I understand, to look at a collector, or someone who claims to be a collector, and just, well, laugh at them and say, oh, you never use your knives, and your opinions are based off of appearance and not of actual usability. And yes, that is probably true for many collectors, and I will admit, sometimes I tend to do that. But in this particular scenario, I actually have used this knife quite a bit, more than most of my others. Now, what is this knife? Well, it's another Otter Messer, and it is the Drei Nieten Messer, also known as the Three Rivet Knife. Now, the Three Rivet Knife, which is clearly referenced by these 3 brass rivets in the center of the handle, this knife is what I suppose you could say the German take on the traditional teardrop jackknife, or even a larger boy's knife. Now, what is a boy's knife? Well, a boy's knife tends to be defined as a teardrop-shaped handle with a spearpoint blade and, obviously, a slipjoint action. This is more what one would expect from a typical boy's knife, and this is also an Otter Messer. This is my most recent acquisition. This knife has half stops, brass hardware, and some very well-grained and well-textured wenge wood. And I really enjoy that knife. It's very well put together, but it hasn't had nearly as much pocket time as this. Now this is, again, a bit of a larger piece, and, well, without further ado, I guess I will start by showcasing the fit and finish. Now, as for the back, there is a bit of gapping, and I am not going to try and hide that fact or downplay it. There is indeed a bit of gapping, primarily up here. And while I would prefer if this didn't happen to be here, it isn't particularly a big deal, especially if it's a using knife, as this is definitely not a piece intended for the collector, but certainly for the user. You have steel liners, a steel spring, these very, very nice worked steel bolsters. I believe these are carbon steel, as they were a bit shinier when I first got the knife. But just a beautiful, beautiful design here. We've got brass pins and the 3 brass rivets on one side. And the rivets themselves are extremely smooth, sanded to perfection, as are these pins here. However, this central pin, don't know if you can see it, but this one sticks up just a little bit, and unfortunately, you can feel it. But aside from that, the transitions are seamless. Bolster to cover, absolutely perfect. Blade play is non-existent on this knife. It's rock solid. The action is fairly good. You have a nail nick, of course. I definitely say this is one of the more comfortable actions on a knife. And as someone who has owned many, many Sheffield knives, which tend to have much, much stiffer springs, I can say that this is definitely a more comfortable action. I'd probably put it at maybe a 6 on my personal scale. It's definitely not a nail breaker, and the nail nick is fairly deep, which means you get a good grip to open the knife. One thing I do have to mention is that the closure is a lot less snappy than the opening. But again, that's not a flaw. It's just something I noticed. There is a stop pin on the inside here to prevent blade wrap, of which I have had none of on this particular piece. The blade is C75 Carbon steel, which again is certainly not a super steel, but for a traditional slip joint knife, that will be more than enough for you. It's very easy to sharpen. I believe I've only needed to give this a real sharpen maybe once or twice, but most often it just needs a little strop. You have your little otter, which is the typical logo you'll see on most Otter Messer knives. And on the tang, although a little hard to read, it does say Solingen, Germany. Also, there is a little bit of corrosion here that I will probably remove sometime after the video. We have a nice little sharpening choil here. Again, makes sharpening very, very easy. I've noticed Spearpoint profile blades tend to be fairly straightforward to sharpen. They're certainly easier than, say, a clip point or a pruner. But you have a nice tip here. Definitely a bit pointier than most spear points, and comparing it to this other Otter spear point, the Drei Nieten Messer is significantly pointier, which I do quite like. I appreciate the more blunted spears, but the pointy ones are my personal favorite. Edge is fairly thin. The blade stock is probably around the 2mm mark. Definitely not thin, but not ridiculous too. Flat grind, which would make for easy sharpening. And this patina here has probably been the work of, I probably would guess, mustard. And the reason that I primarily like this knife, aside from its just general use factor, is I tend to use this as a table knife. Just the dimensions of it and the size of blade make this a wonderful piece if you're ever, say, at a restaurant, and I'm sure anyone who's been to a restaurant that, say, serves steak, you'll understand that the knives are very poor often. But this makes for a wonderful, wonderful piece as a table knife, and cutting sausage, potato, meat pie, absolutely stellar. So chances are that is the reason behind this. Fairly simple, but quite nice patina. I don't believe I forced this one, and if I did, well, I suppose it turned out all right. One thing about the blade that is interesting is this very defined grain, which you can see throughout. The blade did come satin finished. No polish on it. The handles here are made of African Blackwood, also known as Grenadilla or Grenadille, and I think that the brass complements the wood beautifully, and while I would be curious to see what this knife would look like with brass bolsters, I think that the overall appearance of this knife is timeless and absolutely something I would and have enjoyed carrying. Again, despite being a fairly large knife, and a heavy one at that, this does have a nice carrying profile, as it is a teardrop, and I've noticed that teardrop knives tend to slip into the pocket very well. However, the smaller sized ones are often more comfortable. For example, here is a teardrop Barlow by Boker. This one is also in African Blackwood, by the way, so these are the same handle materials. But again, I really like the teardrop. Very comfortable shape in the pocket. Quickly go over measurements. You have, I believe, a blade over 3 inches, but I will confirm that now. Yeah, okay. Your blade is just around, what is that, 3 1/8? And the overall blade length, including the unsharpened part of the tang, is 3 1/2. So even if you want to exclude the tang, your blade is still going to be, from the beginning of the cutting edge, it's going to be over the 3-inch mark. So not quite UK legal, but close, fairly close. And as for the handle, it's coming in at just a little bit under 4 1/4. Again, I'd probably say just a little over 4 1/8. And overall length is just at, or just a little bit over, 7 1/2. So this is by no means a small knife, and you could definitely use this as your primary carry knife, provided you carry slip joints, and I think it would work wonderfully for you. It's definitely a knife that's biased towards someone who has larger hands, as you can see here. You could fit an extra finger or so on the back of this for me, and my hands are, again, fairly small, maybe medium-sized, but this is a very comfortable knife for carry. The unsharpened part of the tang allows you to choke up and get a very nice grip on it. And again, that carbon steel blade, while it might not stay sharp as long as your modern powder super steels, it will get the job done, will be sharpened easily. In fact, might not even require a sharpen, just a strop. And while yes, corrosion resistance is not exactly there, it does happen to be just a very traditional, stylish knife. And the carbon steel, at least in my opinion, does add to that very, very well. So, again, this is somewhat a brief video for me. Normally I drone on for about a half an hour, but there's not much to say. This knife is very well put together. Centering is pretty much perfect. Blade is, well, not warped. You've got, again, a good edge, no blade play. Everything is even and symmetrical. Got a little bit of gapping, but that's only going to bother you if you're nitpicking. But everything really about this knife, again, a little bit of gapping here, everything really is just well done. And for the price that I got this at, I think this was about a 90 Canadian dollar knife. So it was actually significantly cheaper than this particular model, which is a bit newer, actually. This was probably released a few years back. But this knife cost about 160 or 150. So this one was very pricey, but this was a much, much better deal. I got this knife at bushcraftcanada.com, and I will leave a link for those interested in purchasing. And The site does happen to have a very nice selection of otter, and they do sell the beekeeper's knife, or the bee messer, for a very nice price for what it is. But yeah, that's where I got this knife from. Very nice customer service, and I've only bought from them once, but that one experience was very pleasant, admittedly. But this is just a wonderful knife, and the fact that it got me, an arrogant collector who complains about knives but doesn't really carry them all that often, if this knife got me to put in a lot of use with it, then I think that it's safe to say that this is a gem of a piece. I am incredibly impressed with this knife. It is built like a tank, and it has just a timeless aesthetic to it. The style is unbeatable, and this knife, even though I tend to use it more for table use, it gets probably as much pocket time as, say, a Michael May. And these get used a lot. So, again, I definitely think if you're looking for a sturdier, more heavy-duty slip joint, perhaps something within the realm of a Granddaddy Barlow, then this is definitely something you should consider. It's just a classic jackknife. The fit and finish is, I definitely say, superior to likes of, I don't know, Case, or not quite GEC, but definitely getting there. But regardless, this is a very nice piece, and I would probably give it a good 9 out of 10. The only things that could really be improved, I suppose, are just tidying up the back, maybe reducing the gapping a little. But aside from that, and that's just a nitpick, this is a spectacular piece. And I definitely think that it doesn't get as much love as the Anker Messer or the Mercator. So if you're looking to buy an otter knife, maybe give this one a try. And if you live in the UK or you just don't like larger knives, then if you can find one for a good price, maybe take a look at one of these and see if you like that. So, thank you very much for watching. Again, I will attempt to get back to a usual schedule, but I can't make any promises. Regardless, thank you very much for watching. This has been the Otter Messer Drei Nieten Messer, and this is the Knife Raven, as always, signing off. Goodbye.